It was a wonderful trip, but I'm glad that I'm back home.
This is Truth to Ponder with Bob Bierman.
As many of you may know from listening last week, I took a trip on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday to Virginia. And I will admit that I had a wonderful time. Now, I will start the program by telling you that flying today is a very strange and unique experience. I haven't been flying in about a year or so, so getting on an airplane during this pandemic is a strange experience, to say the least. Everybody's got to wear a face covering inside of the airport, and they maintain all the social distancing requirements that you have to do. Everybody has to stand 6 feet apart. You get in line for your gate, they have those little round dots saying, "Be smart, 6 feet apart." And we're all wearing our face coverings. And so there we stand at the airport in Washington, D.C., or Charlottesville, Virginia, or even when I got home to Greenville, South Carolina, the airport that we use because we're currently staying in Georgia, not that far away. And I'm thinking to myself, we're all so scared of the coronavirus that we have to stay 6 feet apart and wear our little paper face covering or whatever it is you're wearing. In my case, I got a neck gaiter because I can actually breathe through that thing, which means it doesn't stop anything in either direction. But when you're told to live in fear, you just do as you're told. And so I dutifully, to get to my destination, my trip was more important than the nonsense that I was going to have to endure. And so I made the trip just to grin and bear it. And so there I was with my little face shield on, wondering what it's going to be like to get on this very small commuter jet aircraft. Not many people can fit on that thing. You got one seat on the left side and two seats on the right. And they're tiny seats, and I'm a tall guy. We get on the airplane, and suddenly we're shoulder to shoulder, up close and personal. So why did we bother for the 10 or 15 minutes to wait in line to get on the aircraft? Why did we have to maintain a 6-foot social distance when the 48 of us get shoved into this tiny tube to sit shoulder to shoulder, up close and personal, side by side? And when they gave me my little can of orange juice, we get to take our little face coverings off. Does any of this make any sense to you at all? I have to wonder. I have to wonder as I look at the numbers, and I really didn't want to talk too much about the pandemic, but I'm going to spend a few minutes on that, and I promise you I'm going to move on to what I think are more important topics. But I just couldn't resist starting the program with this today. I'm reading news stories while waiting at the airport about people testing positive for the virus. Maybe somebody's going to the hospital out of thousands of people at an event. 9 people or 15 people may, and the operative word is may, have come in contact with the virus at this event. Part of me is still saying that there's an effort. There's an effort to keep the fear alive. And I really do find it very troubling. And somebody shared with me something I want to share with you, and I want you to listen to this. This is actually Governor Cuomo from New York State having a telephone conversation with some of his, shall we say, advisors and people. And this is one of those kind of audio items you'd rather not have the public find out if you're trying to keep them, shall we say, underfoot and afraid.
I'll ask, let me make comment and let us, Dr. Zucker. I don't disagree with you. And look, I'm 100% frank and candid. This is not a highly nuanced, sophisticated response. This is a fear-driven response. a policy being cut by a hatchet. It's just a very blunt. I didn't propose this, it was proposed by the mayor in the city. I'm trying to sharpen it and make it better, but it's out of fear. People see the numbers going up. Close everything. It's not the best way to do it, but it is a fear-driven response. The virus scares people. Hopefully, we get the numbers down in the zip codes, the anxiety comes down, and then we can have a smarter, more tailored approach. Your point is right. Why close every school? Why don't you test the schools and close the ones that have a problem? I know, but first, I don't know that we have the resources to do that now, but I can tell you honestly, the fear is too high to do anything other than let's do everything we can to get the infection rate down now, close the doors, close the windows. That's where we are.
Wow, did you hear that? That's where we are. In fear. The fear is too high, as the governor, St. Andrew Cuomo, says. The fear is too high. And it's like they're riding the fear wave that they and the media have helped create. A lot of you, hopefully, who've listened for a while, know me well enough to know that I'm not going to jump into conspiracy theories and I'm not going to give you bad information. I spend time working in emergency management, so my senses were telling me that there's something we're not fully being told when this whole thing started earlier this year. The media was having their heads explode not long ago when they heard that Bob Woodward, the great newspaper reporter from the Washington Compost from years ago, who broke the Watergate story, had this little tidbit not long ago that President Trump was saying that he didn't tell anybody, he didn't want people to have fear. And the implication was that if we knew more earlier, we could have saved lives or some such nonsense. And that he was keeping it a great secret. Let me explain something. At the time, Woodward was talking and interviewing the president. Emergency managers and people all across the country were being told everything. There were no secrets being held. And emergency management agencies, by their very nature, knowing the danger of having people in panic, you don't say anything until you have a plan in place. And this happened in both conservative states and liberal states, red states and blue states. Didn't matter. It didn't matter because you didn't want a rush on the grocery store system. It happened anyway as certain things got out. Remember how you couldn't find toilet paper and other items in the grocery store? Other items got into short supply as people began to hoard. If there had been this could be a super dangerous virus, because we really didn't know everything yet, and it hadn't really gotten here fully yet. We had time to plan and time to prepare. And long before most of you even saw the first inconvenience, long before the dining rooms in a fast food place were shut down, I was already beginning to look at what this could possibly be. And some of these incredibly scary numbers coming from the Imperial College, none of which have ever panned out. Everything we did in response to the coronavirus, everything we ever did, was based upon totally bogus, inaccurate, garbage information from a fake computer program written in the disk operating system DOS decades ago that was nothing but gibberish. you can put different numbers, you can put the same numbers in and get different results each time you ran this supposedly model system to predict infections and deaths. So we were working with this knowledge that millions of people were going to die and die in a short amount of time. They didn't know if it was going to affect all ages about the same early on. They were thinking people that were 30 and 40 could die just as easy as somebody 70 or 80. Maybe your children too. This was the mindset early on in this pandemic. Maybe you don't understand. Maybe you haven't been fully told. But this is what we were working with. And I came out of retirement to help a county, a pretty large one, about 300,000, to get through for them. They did well. But a lot of the things we were told early on, less and less were true. Yet here we are with the media keeping the fear alive. The 200 and some odd thousand people that have died because of the coronavirus, or did they? Or did they? Some people want to hold on to that number and make you think that if somebody gets infected, even if it's a 9-year-old, they're just going to die. Everybody that gets it's going to die. We have to live in fear. You got to keep your face diaper on. You can't go anywhere. You can't do anything. Put on a face shield. I'm in an airport. There are people wearing face masks and face shields and goggles and gloves. They're so afraid of dying, they no longer can even live. They walk around with fear in their eyes. I watched a lady get off an aircraft in Charlottesville, Virginia. She was wearing like a plastic raincoat, her face shield, her face mask, and her goggle things. And she left the airport at the same time I did. And she got into a car with what must be her husband, also wearing a face shield and goggles and a face mask as they drove away. We have lost all sense of common sense. We have lost it. Like I say, I didn't want to spend too much time on this topic, but there's a few things I just have to get off my chest. Are there people dying of this? Yes. Would those people have died regardless? In many cases, yes. Without the virus, yes. Well, how do you know that? Let me just pose you a question. One of the people I was with this past week at this conference, and I'll tell you about it in a little bit, also happens to be a medical doctor. And he pointed out a very interesting statistic. I heard it before. I double-checked it again and triple-checked it to make sure I'm not missing something here. Okay? What does 2020 have that 2019 doesn't, besides the pandemic? We have fewer people dying than we did in 2019, than we did in 2018, and than we did in 2017. Even on a projected basis, if the virus continues at the path that it's going, which, by the way, infections go up, but the overall hospitalizations and people dying is dropping. And even if the trajectory doesn't go down and stay the same, at the end of this calendar year, less people will die in 2020 than died in 2019 or 2018 or 2017 here in the United States. That's just a simple fact. That's not made up numbers. That's not speculation. The numbers are pretty clear. This is the truth based upon projections. If you look at those years from January through the month of September, we're still lower than January through September of 19, 18, and 17. It's that simple. It's that plain and simple. We have destroyed an economy, put fear into our children, played politics. Do I know people that have had this virus? Yes, I do. Did they have a fun ride? No, they didn't. Does anybody ever enjoy having any disease? Even a bad case of the flu? Of course not. Of course not. And all we hear is that a vaccine will save our lives if we can get it soon enough. All we hear is lockdown, lockdown, lockdown. Andrew Cuomo just literally admitted the truth when he talked about what they have done in New York State. He tries to spin the narrative that he did a great job, but he has the worst death rate next to New Jersey per 100,000 people. And in the metropolitan New York area, an excessive number of people died, not because they were so much in close proximity, but those deaths that were unneeded in the nursing homes. That's a hard pill to swallow. We need to look carefully at why this pandemic is being kept alive by the media. They hate good news. They never want to give you any possible good news in the mainstream media about this virus. It's always got to be, I can remember March, April, and May, all the way up until about June. Every day they told you how many more people died today. Today. Thousands died today. Thousands more will die tomorrow. Thousands will be on ventilators by the end of the week. The hospitals will be crashed. They'll be overloaded. They'll have no room. Read a story about New York. Remember Andrew Cuomo talking excessively, we need ventilators. We need 40,000 ventilators. Well, they got a bunch of them. They didn't get 40,000, but they got plenty. They never needed. They're sitting in storage, unused. What happened to the 40,000 people that would be sharing a ventilator in New York because everybody's going to die from this plague that is going to sweep America and take out millions of people? Use it for blame in politics. Whatever happened to our common sense? I can remember back in April and May working in emergency management and reading stories about places like Sweden that said, we're not going to do this full lockdown. Just take some sensible precautions in your daily lives. The schools are open. Well, a lot of people did die in Sweden. Probably a few more than should have because they didn't lock down or they didn't protect the nursing homes quick enough. There would have been a lot less. But how many people are going to the hospital and dying in Sweden? Virtually nobody. This virus has pretty well come and gone its path in that country. And suddenly, this country that had a higher death rate for a while per 100,000 is now in the middle and getting better and better every day. Europe, lots of it that locked down hard and fast. You can't stay locked down forever. You cannot lock down the population eternally in their homes, eternally with a face mask, eternally with goggles and all this foolishness and face shields forever. You can't do it. At some point, people have got to be human beings again. With their families, with their occupations, with their hopes and their dreams. You cannot lock them down like eternal prisoners in a concentration camp, which is what they have done in so much of the world. They have destroyed businesses, families, lives. Alcoholism has increased. Suicides have increased. Bankruptcies have increased. And homelessness, drug addiction is going to surge more than this virus ever will. Because there are people that are trying to keep the hopelessness and fear alive. You need to figure out why. Why are you being so used? Like I say, when I sat down to do this program, I promised myself I would save this for another day. But when thinking about flying in that aircraft last week from Greenville, South Carolina to the Dulles International Airport near Washington, D.C., all commuter planes just shoved shoulder to shoulder, 50 people or so, 48, whatever it is, shoved in that little aircraft. Literally shoulder to shoulder. I'm a big guy. I'm 6'2", sitting next to a guy that's probably 6'4". We were miserable on that little flight for, even though it was only 19 or 20 minutes, the little run from D.C. to Charlottesville. Let me tell you something. Let me tell you something. It was the most miserable 19 minutes of both of our lives because we were just shoved up against the wall. And it's like this little face covering is not going to do anybody any good, especially when your heads are only, 12, 13 inches apart when you look at each other. Yet we had to stand 6 feet apart to get onto the aircraft. Otherwise, we're going to be killing each other and dying because we're not social distancing. And believe me, you had plenty of people running around with their little authoritarian badges, like mall police, running around telling us, stay 6 feet apart, stay 6 feet apart. No, you got to get farther apart. You can't. No, it's too dangerous to get that close. Then for the next, on the way back to Greenville or on the way from Greenville to D.C., for the next hour and 22 minutes, I'm shoulder to shoulder with everybody inside the aircraft. And there's Governor Cuomo being totally honest. They're riding the fear wave and they're not letting it go. They can't. Yes, early on in this virus, there's no doubt it ran through. It infected rapidly. People were getting sick and a number were dying. And now we begin to look. Because, see, the media never qualifies the deaths. You just hear that 1,000 people died today. 2,000 died. That's all you ever heard. And you get that rare incident where some very young person, maybe a child or toddler, dies, and it becomes national news for 3 days that one died. And now we know that the flu, which can happen at any time, any year, kills far more children than the coronavirus. Give you an example. In just simply terms of pediatric children, we're talking really young. A couple of years ago, the flu killed about 300 and some odd little children. But as of now, as the death toll is where it is, only about 100 children, all the way from infancy to age 20, have died. Now think about that for just a minute. Pediatric, we're talking the under 5, 6, we're talking little kids. 300 and some odd in any given flu year. We haven't even hit 100 between 0 and 20 with COVID-19. And sadly, you have to wonder what other issues those young children and young teens may have had. You look at the number of people that have died, and you try to understand how it works. your survival rate. If you're under 20, your survival rate, as I've told you before, is 99.997%. Up to 49, it's like 99.8. And then it increases a little bit even in my age bracket. Still, only a few out of 1,000. And then it increases more when you hit 74 and 80 and ages beyond. That's just the way. That's just the number one. I try to understand what some of the people say. They talk about the people that have died. And if you assume that they died of COVID, not just with it, of COVID, yeah, it may be, the number 3 or 4 cause of death in America. But when flu deaths disappeared and other deaths magically disappeared, literally magically disappeared, because they were able to use the term COVID or with COVID, or may have had a COVID symptom, assumed COVID. There are all these that went on. And we still have less people dying this year to date, month by month, than we have had in prior years. There is an agenda. There is an agenda out there, I firmly believe, to keep this virus front and center until November the 3rd is over and past. I remember a study that I read that had nothing to do with politics. This was just a bunch of people in a research think tank that were following, and they've modeled diseases and pandemics and epidemics and everything else for ages. And they just do it from a basically common sense medical point of view. And they were talking about, at the time, we hadn't got into some of these silly lockdowns and re-lockdowns and everything else. They talked back in, April, May, that if we let this thing run its course without getting too fanatical, like they have in some states like Michigan, New York, Maryland, even North Carolina and Virginia, that by middle November, this virus in America would begin to snuff itself out, and it would be very noticeable as you got to that time. I think the fact that we are doing like 1 million tests a day versus 30,000 tests, that's a big difference. And you find a lot of people may have the virus, but do they have symptoms? Do they get sick? Do they die? Or do they simply stay home for 10 days and recover, like they do from the flu, and not spread it to other people? One of the problems with the flu, it's why it can hit millions of people, not 7 million, but 60 million, is we treat it as it's not that bad. And so we get it and spread it. We don't stay home when we should. We in this country have lost all sensibility of common sense. I really think we have. And so we went out to dinner on Thursday night. Like I say, I was with a group of clergy, and we all had to get out of our car, and as we got close to the building, we have to put a little face mask on outside to walk in the door to sit down and take them right back off again. This is the kind of a thing. 6 foot apart, waiting to get on an airliner, then shoulder to shoulder once on board. What have we done to ourselves? I'm telling you, I'm looking at these news stories that I read, and if we're honest about it, they stopped counting flu deaths on April the 4th officially in this country, and they became COVID deaths immediately, and that continued on until May. Then as that went down, and it's just, like I say, if it's only COVID, it's one thing. With is another. What else would take somebody's life? The world has lived in fear, and it looks like the politicians have made good use of it. I'm afraid of what we're becoming. People are being separated in such a way I've never seen before in my life. They've learned to no longer live because they will die. And they've ceased living. We are becoming less interpersonal one to another because we're afraid of each other. The other person may kill you or hurt you or make you sick and die. We've lost our humanity. And even among many people of faith, they live more in fear of the virus than in the fear of God. And those are the kind of things that deeply concern me going forward. Well, I didn't expect to do this rant and rave. Honestly, I didn't. And I apologize because I really have some more happy things to talk about. More exciting things that I want to share. This is the program Truth to Ponder, and I'm your host, Bob Bierman. I'm going to share few things that people have sent me along the way. I haven't had a chance to share with you about where they listen, how they listen. Some things that are in the back of my mind going forward, and some things that we, especially as Christians, need to be doing in the new world we're coming into. You watch the news, you're looking at how bold the tech tyrants of the Facebook and the Twitters and the YouTubes and whatever, they are becoming literally tyrants. They are going to tell you what you're allowed to say and think and do. Truth doesn't matter anymore to them. It's a narrative they have to keep alive. You debate climate change being all man-made and all the United States' fault. You are shut down because you cannot speak that. That is a lie to them. You must be re-educated. If you support conservative values, you must be silenced. We, my friends, are going to have to do something. That's part of what I want to talk about in the next hour. But do it from a positive point of view. Really, we really can. There are a lot of things that you and I tend to take for granted. In the world that we live, we somehow believe things will always somehow get better. And for the first time in my life, I'm not 100% so certain. But that doesn't mean I'm going to give up hope. And that doesn't mean I'm going to not do anything or try. I'm not a defeatist. But the world that I grew in as a child is gone. We may have all this wonderful technology at our fingertips, but the hardened heart and the condition of men, being deceitful and hurtful, and a culture of death has not changed. It's still among us. So we're going to try desperately after the break coming up. We're going to change direction. I really promise we will. There's a lot of wonderful things that can come out of even hard and bad times. There's examples all across Scripture about being taken through turmoil and tribulation. We're not promised an easy ride or an easy road. Some people will fear for their life more than the fear of God. I think looking at what happens to people living in fear, as we've seen during this corona pandemic, is good evidence. I'll tell you what, we'll be right back in a couple of minutes. I want to remind you of the website, of course, Truth to Ponder. That's truth2ponder.com. Truth2ponder.com. And our mailing address. And I've had a few letters, and I want to share a couple of things that people have said. I want to thank you for taking the time to write me. And our address in Georgia, we're here for at least the month of October, November. Might even be part of December. We don't know yet. Things always seem to be changing. But right now, it's 21 Berkshire, Berkshire, Berkshire Lane, number 263. That's our special little box system up here in our community. That's 21 Berkshire Lane, number 263. In the city of Sky Valley, 2 words, Sky Valley, Georgia, zip code 30537. That is Sky Valley, Georgia, 30537. One last time. 21 Berkshire Lane, number 263. Sky Valley, Georgia, 30537. We will be right back.
This is Truth to Ponder with Bob Bierman.
The definite mohar in a moment. Shalom Aleichem. This is the nice Jewish boy, Jonathan Kahn, your Jewish connection, bringing you the riches of your Jewish roots in Jesus. Now get your pen out as fast as you can so you don't miss out on receiving a special free gift you're going to get and love in a moment. Now, in ancient times, when a Hebrew man was to marry a Hebrew woman, he'd have to give her what was called the mohar. Now, the mohar was the bridal price. It was a sign of his love for her. And when he paid it, it signaled the end of her old life and the beginning of the new. By paying the mohar, she was no longer bound by her old house. She wasn't of it anymore. She was no longer just a girl in the house. She was now the kala, the bride. And here's the deep mystery. Messiah is the bridegroom. And just as the Hebrew bridegroom had to pay the mohar for the bride, so Messiah pays the mohar, the bridal price, for us. His life on the cross, that's the mohar. And when the mohar is paid, there's no doubt anymore. It wasn't a fuzzy thing. It wasn't a vague or wishful thing or a hypothetical thing. It was a real and definite thing. It was sure, exact, and absolute. Once the mohar is paid and you receive it, you are no longer who you were. You are now the bride. Once the mohar is paid, you are no longer of the old house or the old life. You're of the new. Once it's paid, you're not bound anymore to that old thing in your old life. You're not under any bondage from the old life at all. Once the mohar is paid, you're free to walk out of the old. The doors which were locked before now swing open. The mohar was always a real and sure thing with no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But it would mean nothing if the bride didn't accept and believe it. So receive the mohar, my friend, and all its power, the atonement of God. Walk in its power, and you'll go from weakness to strength, from oldness to newness, and from bondage to freedom. Want more? Ask for the mohar. Now imagine being plugged into a special line that lets you in on future events, news behind the news, biblical prophecy, updates on Israel, and what you need to know as an end-time believer, plus teachings and strength for every day of your week, and the incredible mystery of the temple doors, all free. How do you get all this? Easy. Just remember Jesus' Hebrew name, Yeshua, and dial it. That's it. It's so easy. Just dial 1-800-YESHUA-1. But call now, 1-800-YESHUA-1. Now, I invite you to join with me to reach the unreached peoples of the world in the most incredible way, from Moscow to Madagascar, even to Jerusalem. Just call now, 1-800-YESHUA-1. That's YESHUA-1. Or write me direct, The Nice Jewish Boy, at Box 1111, Lodi, New Jersey, 07644. It's A Nice Jewish Boy. It's Box 1111. It's in Lodi, Lodi, New Jersey. The zip 07644. Well, till next time, this is Jonathan Kahn saying Shalom Aleichem. Peace be to you, my friend, in Messiah Hechatan, the bridegroom of our souls.
This is Truth to Ponder with Bob Bierman.
And welcome back to the Monday edition of Truth to Ponder. I'm Bob Bierman. I'm so glad that you find time to listen either on shortwave or as a podcast, even on a couple of regular AM/FM radio stations. Let me know where you're listening. I've had a number of people. Oh, by the way, before I forget, the music underneath my voice actually has a title. It's called Goodbye, Virginia. And I know some of you love the state of Virginia, but under the current political structure in that state, I was very happy to say goodbye to Virginia and Charlottesville and some of the strange things that you have to go through there these days. Between what has happened with places like Alexandria and the north part of Virginia around Richmond and maybe near Charlottesville, there's the university. There's a lot of strange things happen in that state. Like I say, some of the masks at Virginia, you got to wear these little face coverings. And you talk to doctors, I mean, real honest-to-goodness frontline physicians, and they will tell you that they really don't do a whole lot of good. They're seeing people getting other illnesses because of not knowing how to properly wear a face mask. It's all a placebo to make you think you're doing something important, according to some. All I know is how hard it is for me after a while to breathe with one on for hours, as you have all this bacteria and dampness collecting, and it's not, I don't see how that can possibly be healthy. But allegedly they claim that it works. We're doing our part, though we were told early on they don't do any good. And we have years and years and years of science. We always hear that term. We always follow the science. And the science has said for decades they don't do anything in what they're trying to make them do now, but we're doing it. So Virginia's a beautiful state. The people I was with, that's what I want to talk about in a moment. They're some of the nicest people from around the country. Some that I haven't seen in years, some that I have worked with before in ministry. And honestly, we had a great time. Before I get into that, I want to mention some of the letters that I've received. And when you write or send an email and you tell me you listen on shortwave in particular, if you can think of the frequency, that's only a few of them that we possibly are using right now, and that may change. 9395 kilohertz is at 6 p.m. Eastern. 9455 kilohertz is 4 p.m. Eastern and 10 p.m. Eastern, except for Wednesday. It's not on at 10 o'clock. And I think Monday and Tuesday, it's on 5850. The frequency is extremely important. And I'm beginning to wonder if some of the frequencies are not being listened to. It seems, maybe I'm wrong and you can tell me, that the most listened to time currently has been at 4 p.m. Eastern on the frequency 9455 kilohertz. That seems to be the most listened to from what I'm gathering. Some have said they listen on shortwave, but they didn't tell me what time or frequency, so I would really need some help. As I told you before, shortwave time is not free, and I can only afford so much right now. I'm on a very limited budget, and I'm going to have to make a decision of cutting back or cutting off entirely. I know some people say they depend on it, they're listening to it, and I appreciate that, but I also have to put food on the table for my wife and myself. And so I've got to make some hard decisions coming up in the next week or two. Maybe I can continue on one, maybe another one, but I just don't think I can do all of these 3 broadcasts today and the 4th one that goes on, on 5850. I wish I had a better frequency at night that would be going a little bit more to the west, but there's just nothing available right now. I wish there was. And so I've got to watch the budget entirely, and we've been doing this now for, it'll be 2 months. We finished up in about 2 weeks from now, a little under 2 weeks. And I just want to be a good steward of what resources I started with. And so let me know if you're listening on shortwave as a podcast. And I'm going to address the podcast side in just a moment. But, the frequency and time is really important. Not so much the day. I mean, I'm going to figure Monday through Friday. And I know there's some airings on the weekend. The Friday broadcast re-airs a few times on Saturday and Sunday, primarily on 9395 kilohertz, if I'm not mistaken. There may be another frequency in there. But you can, let me know. I've got to make that decision, and I just don't want to pull the plug where there is a actual audience. And if you're part of that audience, I've got to know soon. So you can either use the email address, which is really simple, bob@truth2ponder.com. That'll come directly to me and nobody else. bob@truth2ponder.com. That email comes only to me. Nobody else reads it. So if you want to share anything personal, you can do that. Somebody talked about the story that had aired. They did it by email this past Friday and weekend. I recorded it before we headed out of town and took my trip, about the circumstances of my birth. This past Friday was my 66th birthday. And I shared the story of of how I came into this world and why I'm where I'm doing some of the things I'm doing today. And I'm glad that they appreciated that. Others have written and then let me know that they listen. Had a couple of letters stating the same thing, that they listen. And once again, frequency and time, very important if you have it. Or even if you're not sure the frequency, something close. I can kind of figure, 9495, you may have it off a little bit. I can figure that out. Or compared to 9455, I know. Maybe some of the analog dials are a little bit more difficult. We quite often should tell the frequency at WRMI. They should. That would be a great help. But it's not as easy to do that under the circumstances that we have, with the automation there. I'm familiar with it because I'm there occasionally during the wintertime. But getting back to what my trip is all about and what I want to get into, and it's going to be part of our talks on and off over the next week or two. I have been, as many of you know, in the ministry for about, since the mid-1990s. I was ordained first in 1996, so we're 24 years in, almost a quarter century. And I've been a church pastor, I've been a hospice chaplain, I've done a lot of things in ministry. I never gave up my broadcast career, and after the passing of my first wife, took on a different career in emergency management for a while during a time of change and transition in my life. But I feel more content in the two arenas of ministry and broadcast because I can use the broadcast as a ministry tool. And I'm also involved with some online projects that some of you may be aware. I'll be mentioning them in a few minutes. But early in my ministry, well, I shouldn't say early. Let's go back maybe about 15 years, roughly speaking. 15 years. I had been in a church body as an Anglican called the Anglican Province in America. And I decided it was a difficult time after the losing of my first wife that I just felt I couldn't continue with them. And I don't want to talk about personalities. I had my reasons. And I felt it was time to make a change. And I got a phone call from a person in ministry that I knew in a very parallel and similar group to a degree to ours. And I knew the guy. And he was one of the first people to call to check on me. Been months. And asked how I was doing, and I told him I'm doing terrible, and I explained why and what I was going through. And he invited me to become a part of their church body. I could be received. I was a pastor type. We call it a priest or presbyter. You take your choice. And he's a bishop, and he asked me if I would consider joining, and he made it possible, and I did. And it's a group called the United Episcopal Church of North America, a break-off from the Episcopal Church from years ago, conservative, Bible-believing, just wonderful people of God. I just love them. And I spent some time with them, and then the bishop I was with retired, and there was some changes and in my life at that time, and I decided to move on and put my ministry on hold, and with a different group that I was closer to, as I served for a while in a non-church setting. Well, I've reconnected with a lot of my friends in that particular church body, the United Episcopal Church. Great people. Some people I haven't talked to in like 10 years. But media and social media can be a great tool if properly used. Even though we have tyrants running those giants right now. Over the past 10 years or so, I've reconnected to a lot of people I knew in ministry, even people from before I got into ministry, from my early days in radio, of all things. I've connected with a lot of people because of social media. So there is a good side. It's not just for arguing with everybody anymore and getting angry. There can be a good thing out of social media. Maybe we need to get back to the innocent days of the Facebooks and all of that and YouTube that we've long seemed to have gone past. Remember when Facebook was about family, friends, and pictures of cats? And maybe that Afghan you put together or something? And your grandkids or your child that graduated high school? Now it's become a lot of things that I wish it wasn't, but it is what it is at the moment. But I did connect with a lot of people. And about a little over a year ago, I started making some reach out and contacts, and their presiding bishop, just a wonderful individual. And you'll be hearing from him at some point, I'm sure, on this show and some other projects that I'll be working on. Peter Robinson, he's from England originally. He and his wife live in Waynesboro, Virginia, a beautiful little community up in the mountains. They have a wonderful church there, wonderful church family, just wonderful people to be with. You just don't know what a joy that it was. And I was going to have Bishop Peter Robinson, come to visit us, the group that I'm with, when we were going to meet back in February. That was our time that we were going to get together in St. Augustine, Florida. And he had his flight all arranged, everything, and we had everybody arranged to come down. And then the weather turned lousy everywhere in February, especially for those coming from the north. Flights are being canceled, and there's just no way to pull this thing off. Now, thankfully, we're not that big of a group, so a few phone calls, and we decided we're going to reschedule this maybe in April or in May. Not a problem. So we're just going to reschedule. No big deal. And the only thing that was bad, some of my reservation stuff, I couldn't cancel the hotel. But, it happens. Things, it was upsetting, but you just got to learn to live with it. I mean, I have to learn patience too, and sometimes it's not easy. But saying that. So we never got a chance to get together. I wanted him to meet with some of our people because they, as a church body, and the church body that I represent, the Reformed Anglican Church, theologically, I can't find any difference between the two of us. Even in our way of faith and practice and most everything, anything of importance, we're in full agreement. And the Bible says, why be separated? Why be divided? And I wanted to open that door to begin to work together. Maybe our jurisdictions need to be more just in terms of geography, not in theology. And we need to just learn to work together because we can. And we should. And unfortunately, we couldn't because of COVID-19 and everything. The next thing I know, I'm out of retirement working back in emergency management. I mean, we're talking, it was literally the day after my flight was canceled, and not our flight, my hotel was canceled, and we couldn't go to St. Augustine, is when I got the phone call about the coronavirus. That's how early it was in February that I knew all these things and horrible numbers. And I mean, I couldn't say anything because you don't want to spread panic. And I wondered if we would ever get together. I knew it was not going to happen that spring. I knew it immediately then. Maybe the fall, maybe the summer, maybe next year, you never know. And I knew that the United Episcopal Church had originally planned their gathering for some time in the summer. Well, that was not going to happen. And they finally decided, because they had sufficient space and everything else, and it's not a huge number, about 55 or so or 60 people coming to that area, and we had plenty of social distancing and everything else going on. I decided I'm going to go. If I can't get Bishop Robinson to be with us, which would have been a little bit easier, but I'll just go visit with them. And I didn't realize until I got there, especially as we got together on Thursday morning. I got in Wednesday afternoon late, like 7 o'clock at night, and by the time I got out of the aircraft, got my rent-a-car, and drove the 45 minutes to an hour, whatever it was, to my hotel in Waynesboro, it was after 9 o'clock by the time I got to my room. 2 airline flights of all the nonsense and everything else, and it took a while to get to sleep. But I remember coming across, we were actually not far from the church, literally across the street and a block away. And I came I got out of my room and started heading over, and I saw some other guys were all wearing our clerical collars, and And some of these people I don't recognize. And I'm wearing, of course, not a black shirt. I get to wear this, kind of a purplish shirt because I'm a bishop. And everyone's greeting me, good morning, Bishop. And, and some of these people, some looked at me, wait a minute, I know you from years ago. I mean, it was just a wonderful time. And we came into that church building, beautiful church, had a wonderful organist that day. There was an ordination, there was a service. And I didn't realize, with all that has gone on with COVID-19 since February, for me, and March for everybody else, I didn't realize how bad my batteries needed to be recharged spiritually. I didn't realize just how depressed I had become because of allowing myself to be beaten up by this virus and those that try to keep the virus alive and longer and locking us down and giving us despair. I forgot how important it is to fellowship and worship and praise God and sing. And how many governors don't want you to sing because don't you know church-going folk are going to kill everybody. We can't go to school because we'll kill our children, though it doesn't happen that way. We've been lied to, used, and abused for political gain and power. Is it a serious virus? I've told you 100 times on this show. Yes, it is. There are things even more serious and even more contagious and more deadly. We have done things to ourselves, our nation, our children, that we never would have thought we would have done in most any other time in history, I know in my lifetime. Nothing like we've ever seen. The fear that has been spread and the politics that have been used with this pandemic have been scary. But with that said, what I want to talk about, I'm not going to have time to get into it today. Tomorrow, I'm going to spend some time talking about the trip that I made and being with all these wonderful clergy and people that I didn't realize just how much my personal batteries needed a major spiritual recharge. To go to that first session, to be among fellow believers in a beautiful church building, to sing worship and praise and be in God's presence. Funny how fast we forgot what that was like when the churches started to shut down. And seeing a service or two on YouTube or something like that was just not going to be the same. And I didn't realize how much I missed it. And I'll be sharing a lot more tomorrow about that. And also something else in the back of my mind. We have got to stop being dependent upon the tech tyrants. We need our own platforms. I'm going to be talking about that extensively. I run one ministry online. I plan to run several others. And yes, I'll use what I can out of Facebook and Twitter and what have you, as long as I can get away with it, as long as they will let me. Let me know you listen. Our mailing address right now in Georgia, 21 Berkshire Lane, number 263, Sky Valley, Georgia, 30537. Tomorrow, please listen. I'm going to share some very important things that I really believe you need to know. Until tomorrow, may God bless you.
This has been Truth to Ponder with Bob Bierman. To find out more, visit our website, truth2ponder.com. That's truth2ponder.com. Truth to Ponder, shining the light of truth in a darkening world.